Okay, I think we are live. So, welcome everyone. Always double checking to make sure I can see everything I need to see. Welcome. I'm back for another uh chat. I want to say Q&A, but it will be Astro Chat with Britt. Okay, Britt, welcome. It's so great to be back. I feel like it's been ages since we've done this.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, November was all kinds of crazy, so it's nice to be
Yes.
back.
Yes. Oh, I realized, I mean, there's so many things that were going on astrologically in December where regular rhythms and habits and patterns were just kind of all topsy-turvy. And I feel like even us not doing this as early in the month as we normally would was part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's good to be
Yeah.
back. I feel like, with Saturn stationing direct this morning and then Mercury tomorrow, I feel like okay, there's a bit of forward momentum it's happening. It's
It's
going to
coming.
happen.
It's
Yes,
coming.
yes. Just very
Absolutely.
needed.
Yes. Yeah, it does feel like as much as November has been a really full month, it's definitely had a hectic quality and that
Mm,
sense of like being in a like with some parts of our charts and lives being in a bit of a loop where we've just been going back over.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, we've talked about this. Now we're going to talk about it again because we still haven't come to an agreement. Like I
Hmm.
know even in my personal life, like with friends, partner, family, like we'd be talking about something at the start of the month and then we didn't quite get it sort of resolved or planned out and then like a week later we come back to it and then a week later we come back to it and it's like oh my god, when are we going to finish this?
It's so true. That loop, like just having the same conversations over and over again and knowing that that's
Yes.
still like ongoing, especially
Yes.
with Mercury's shadow still like a bit of over 2 weeks away still, right? Before the
Yes.
shadow period is over. So
Yeah.
just, yeah, giving ourselves some grace and some, pacing ourselves a little bit that will still be ongoing. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really fair that even though we're looking at December and some of the things like that are shifting as we start December and what's going to happen in December, the first couple of weeks of December still feels like resolving or sorting out the stuff of November and even late October.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know there is a shift. So you mentioned Saturn Station Direct, which is as we're recording this, like 27th, 28th of November. Saturn has just Station Direct, which I do think is an interesting one because this is Saturn now pushing forward for its last pass in
Hmm.
Pisces. So
Yeah.
that idea of what do we need to wrap up here before we go on to the next piece?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that ingress will be also like
Like Saturn into Aries.
February already.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's just
mid-February. It's not long.
yeah,
It's not
yeah,
long.
yeah.
But I don't know about you. My favorite ingress, like very end of November, early December, is Venus.
Hmm.
How are you feeling about Venus coming into Sagittarius?
Well, it's quite a dignity shift, right? So that I think we're all waiting for. Most of
Yes.
us are happy to be out of Venus in Scorpio can be quite intense and a bit, gloomy sometimes. Also very passionate. I do want to speak to
Mm,
that. Like no
yeah,
shame and no hate to the Venus in Scorpio natives. I personally love them. So absolutely don't feel bad if that's your natal placement. But there's some
totally.
kind of, lingering or maybe a bit more there's a depth that Venus in Scorpio has that is for some people maybe nice to have a bit of a change with Venus in Sagittarius, bring that expansion and that openness and a bit more
Yes.
welcoming the world in a different way.
Totally. Yeah, I do think, technical dignities aside, I do think Venus in Scorpio has some really rich insights to share about loyalty and
Yes.
trust and togetherness. And there is passion there. And sometimes with
Mhm.
Venus in Scorpio, that passion can be a little like complex or there's like a
Mhm.
twist to it. And so, one of the things I look forward to when Venus comes out of Scorpio into Sagittarius, which is like November 30th, December 1st, just depending on where people are, I do appreciate Venus in Sagittarius a little bit more upfront, a little bit more
Yeah.
straightforward. There's less of that mysterious energy. And I think that mystery and that love of mystery of Venus in Scorpio, I think it has a place and we need elements of it in life. But I know just given everything else that's been going on in November, I'm looking forward to that kind of sort of onwards and upwards. Like, are we going? Are we going together? Let's just get moving, which is very Venus in Sagittarius.
Yeah, yeah, and there's something also about just letting go that can be really
Yes.
nice because that's something that
Yes.
Scorpio placements struggle with. And I can
Mm-hmm.
say that as someone with Scorpio placements. And
Yes.
it's just nice. Like I've been reflecting on that in my personal life, like what it means to let go. And it's about allowing things to move at their own pace and allowing things to move forward. And I think that's really something that you see in the shift that planets do from Scorpio to Sagittarius, where it's less like the holding on and the grabbing and like the trying to keep things close to you, but allowing them to move and then allowing them to move forward and expand at their own, their own way. And I do feel that Venus in Sagittarius has that quality that can be, really expansive and uplifting and just
Yes.
this enjoyment of just life coming at its own, with its own little adventures and its own little pathways that we can just discover. And there's something really nice about that.
That's a really great point. I love how you're kind of drawing out, Venus in Scorpio has like a stillness or a depth or a holding on kind of quality, like a real attachment to what is or how things are. Whereas Venus in Sagittarius is very much like sort of almost everything is water off a duck's back. Like it just rolls away or we roll through it. Like we meet
Mm,
it and we keep moving, if you like. And
yeah,
that idea of, okay, yep, noted and continue on kind of thing.
yeah.
And that does feel, sometimes when we wish for movement with the planets, then we get it. It's like so much. But I think with
Mm,
Venus, it'll be nice. You know, Venus is of course going to support all kinds of relational interactions. So, with friends, with family, with our intimate partners, with colleagues and co-workers, that Venus in Sagittarius is like, where are we going? What's next? And I think that's a nice perspective shift for sure.
yeah, absolutely. And I do feel like it also brings that sense of wonder and awe that you can find in
Mm,
Sagittarius placements of like,
yes.
wow, this is really cool or really like a fun little adventure. Like I always think of adventure novels and stuff like that with Sagittarius placements. There's just like, oh, this is fun. Like, why not?
Yes, why
Like
not? Yeah. There's that openness, isn't there? Like, let's give it a shot and see what
yes.
happens.
Yeah,
And I think that's a kind of a fun end of year vibe to have.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so then when we roll into December, um, I mean, I know you mentioned the lunations when we were prepping, and I really do have my eye on that full moon in Gemini. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's a mixed bag of
It is.
many things. What have you got
Yeah.
your eye on around that full moon?
Well, like just thinking about the full moon in Gemini in general, like it's very chatty and it's quite busy. So that's like it always brings a lot of buzz, I think, this time of year, the full moon in Gemini. I was eyeing, of course, the opposition to Mars. That's happening quite
Yeah.
quickly after the lunation. Like it's still
Yes.
like I think 9 degrees away, but given
Yeah.
that the moon moves so quickly, it still happens on the same day or within a couple of hours. So it's
Yeah.
actually the first aspect that you see that the moon is making. So it does make me a bit, wonder about a bit of agitation or restlessness coming into the mix. I think
Yeah.
overall this moon just looks very dynamic and just very buzzy, buzzy, but also
Yes.
with the potential for some agitation or stirring up some frustration or,
Yeah.
things really heating up. And I can imagine also with a lunation in Gemini that's brings up all the words and all the all the ideas and all the concepts. With that opposition with Mars, I can imagine that there could be a potential for, just blurting things out or just having like a lot of things happening a bit too fast. I think what
Yes.
what I'm getting at is there's a very fast pace to this
Yeah.
moon. It's very
Yeah.
dynamic.
Totally. And I think that's the key is like the full moon, it's Gemini, December 4th or 5th, depending on where you are. But within well, certainly within 24 hours of that full moon, maybe, I don't know, 12 hours, I haven't done the exact numbers, but that moon does oppose Mars. And that to me is like, there's sort of an outburst, or there
Mm,
is a reactive quality, or there is some tension that you have to navigate, like a disagreement comes forward. I
yeah.
love the words that you're using, like the agitation and almost like an overstimulated thing with the full moon in
Mm-hmm.
Gemini. Like there's just
Yes.
too much that happens in a short space of time, whether it's too many ideas, too many interactions, too many decisions, or too many disagreements as well. Like I think that's
Mm-hmm.
very possible. There is some friction in that opposition from the full moon in Gemini to Mars, for sure.
Yeah, and this only applies to this part of the world, but here in the Netherlands, and I think in some parts of Belgium and maybe Germany, there is actually a holiday that we celebrate on this day. So I can imagine
Ah,
family stuff or agitation coming up around this time. So for people that are
yes.
in the Netherlands, watch out for Sinterklaas. I guess it's
Yes, right. So that,
yeah,
like, if you're going to be with family, it could be more
right.
of a
Yeah.
tense, like your
Hmm.
disagreements might be all coming out in the open.
Yeah, yeah, and of
Yeah.
course it is like in general all over the world for people that celebrate Christmas or other types of holidays. There is a lot of
Mm,
travel involved. There is a lot of movement already in this time
yeah.
of year for people going back to family or visiting friends or stuff like that. So I can imagine that, if there are no arguments, then at least there's a lot of movement or like a need to, vent or process or find a way to channel the buzz that this full
Yes.
moon is likely to generate.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, Gemini and Sagittarius as a sign pair have so much about movement and experimenting and trying things. So whether it's travel or whether it's just that movement of I'm going to be doing my life in a different way, like I'm moving the pieces of life around. It really feels like decisions are going to come out of this full moon.
Yeah.
Um, when I looked at that full moon chart, of course, the full moon opposite Mars is like the first thing I see, and I think it's going to be right there. But I also looked at the ruler of the full moon, which is
Hmm.
Mercury. And that's where I had a little bit more like, I don't know if hope's the right word, or just the idea that, yes, there's a lot of like of that heat of Mars that we've got to burn off or burn through. But underneath it, there is like a bigger game plan or, support for growth that is underneath that. And I see that from the ruler of the full moon, Mercury, which is in Scorpio, and it's moving to its final trine with Jupiter in Cancer. And so that to me is like, if we can get through the niggles or the little surface disagreements, you might find there is something to agree on or plan for with others that you get to. And timeline wise, I see that like the first 24 hours after the full moon is more of the hot of Mars. And then, like, once we get to 2 days after, we're getting into that Mercury Jupiter. So, I don't
Mm.
know, Britt, if you have, like, how have you sort of thought about that Mercury Jupiter piece with this full moon?
Yeah, I like that timeline of that because it just sounds to me like solutions come.
Yeah.
Even if there's agitation or frustration or disagreements, then the
Yeah.
next day that trine between Mercury and Jupiter can offer some solutions, some support, some ease, and a willingness to maybe compromise or work together. That I do feel that, Jupiter, of course, in Cancer does add that balm and that ease here. So that's
Yeah.
hopeful, and there's definitely like you don't have to, you don't have to separate or create these frictions or fights with family members or stuff like that. There's always solutions, I think,
Yeah.
that this aspect speaks to.
Totally. And I think, in therapeutic terms, it's like there could be a little bit of a disruption or a rift, but then we can get to the repair and the
Absolutely.
reconnection, or we realize we might disagree about one thing, but we actually agree about a bunch of other things. And so
Yeah.
we come back to that kind of quite quickly.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
okay.
feel like
Yep.
repair is such an important piece to really highlight because I do think it's good to just to remind ourselves that any rupture is inevitable, but our relationships are measured by the quality of our repair. So even if there's
Yes.
something that happens in these days that just does feel difficult, then know that with the repair, there's really a lot of work that you can do that can actually help your relationships grow and flourish.
And that's a really good point because what like a lot of research shows us is that relationships are often stronger having gone through a repair. And so you only get to that if you understand that disagreements will be part of it and
Yeah.
yeah, how we navigate that disagreement or that friction that's important rather than avoiding the friction altogether. And
Yeah.
so I think we could say that this full moon is ultimately, the full moon in Gemini, ultimately a way to help you get to a deeper place with some of your most important people and partnerships, even to get to a deeper understanding of some of your most important ideas or guiding principles, even if you have to grapple with them along the way.
Yeah, such a good reminder.
Yeah. Okay. We are going to take a few questions at some point. So if you are listening live, you're welcome to drop your questions in the chat. But I know there's still a couple of things about December that we should address. Britt, do you want to share your like aspect, that you really have your eye on for December?
Well, I think we talked about a really helpful aspect just now. Maybe it's
Yes.
good to flag an aspect that might bring some more challenge and some difficulty, and that's the Mars square Saturn that's happening 9 December in Europe. Maybe it's happening earlier in
I
other
think,
time
yeah, the
zones.
8th, like the December 8th in like
Yeah.
December 8th or 9th, I'm kind of thinking about for that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that can be a tough one because, of course, there's two malefic planets in a square aspect, with Mars bringing that energy and that forward momentum, and then Saturn basically saying, well, no, we're
No,
not going to do that. So often, I think this aspect or any Mars-Saturn combination, especially the hard aspects, can really feel like this desire to push forward, but just not being able to get any momentum. So it's kind of like often the analogy of the gas and the pedal, the gas and the brakes at the same time. There's
yes,
a lot of energy that you spend in trying to get somewhere that you're not actually getting anywhere. That's
totally.
usually very
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah, I think frustration is like the word I come back to so often for a Mars square Saturn aspect. That sense of all of the energy and enthusiasm of Mars kind of bumping into whatever is symbolically Saturn, bumping into a limit or a reality check or a rule or an official requirement, a bunch of things that just kind of slow the process down and either say, no, you can't in kind of a firm or final way, or like, not yet.
Yeah.
That idea of like, I thought, you thought this was going to be like a now thing or an immediate thing. It's going to require more time or there's extra effort. So that frustration and that heat, I think, is definitely part of it. And as much as we're saying like December 8 or 9 for Mars square Saturn, because that's when it comes to its exact activation, I think we could easily give a day or two either side of that because Mars does move a
Yeah.
little bit more slowly. And so Mars does make these more tough angles to Saturn a couple of times a year, whether Mars is conjunct Saturn or opposite Saturn or square Saturn, like it is around this second week of December. So, just to put it into context, like you've all lived through a few of these this
Yeah.
year and a dozen of these over the last couple of years, but it certainly is a couple of days where you think, I've really got to slow down here, or caution is appropriate. If you feel hesitant about something, listen to that and maybe do some more research. Maybe you haven't prepared as much as you thought you had. Maybe
Mm.
your contingency plan isn't as strong as it needs to be, or you haven't got your fallback options secured. In an aspect like this, there's so much of that Saturn energy that sort of comes forward, which is very much about where is the choice that's going to make me feel safe, or how am I building foundations? And, we talk a lot about frustration with Mars and Saturn. One of the things I think, particularly with the square aspect with Mars and Saturn, square aspects, I always think about adjustments.
Mm.
We've got to rejig things, we've got to reformat it. And one of the disagreements that Mars and Saturn have is about timelines. Mars
Yeah.
is right now, and Saturn is like, this is going to be better if we put it off for a while. And so, some of the tension that you might be navigating may be a scenario where one person is arguing for the push and the pressure to do it now. And somebody else is saying, I think we are better off taking more time, delaying this, whether it's for a week or a month, a quarter, or a year. There's probably some wisdom in going a little more slower than you might have hoped. I mean, a Mars
Yeah.
Saturn aspect such a big thing though, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's always like such a good reminder with these kinds of aspects. Like I think it's a quote from maybe Brene Brown or someone like adjacent. Like
Yes.
we can do hard things, right? But
Yes.
also to
Yes.
add like something else there, we also don't always have to. We don't always have to
Yes.
burn ourselves out doing that. Because yes, you can do hard things, and sometimes that really is like for Mars Saturn people, that's kind of like their, can be a bit of a modus operandi. And it's also a good reminder that sometimes it's okay to take it slow and not push yourself through that resistance and
Mm,
burn yourself out in the process, because that can be a result of this aspect with Mars, further pushing and agitating where there's just a lot of resistance. So it's a good reminder that sometimes if you meet a wall, if you meet resistance, then that can also be a sign to just slow down and stop trying so hard.
yeah. Yeah, I think back to the analogy you brought up when we first started talking about Mars and Saturn, Britt, about like having your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time. And obviously the car will create a bit of smoke
Yes,
eventually
yes,
if you do
yes.
that.
Yeah,
And the personal symbolism of that is like you're just going to make yourself more angry, or you're going
yeah,
to expend a lot of energy for very little progress or movement.
yeah.
That I think we can do hard things is Glennon Doyle, which is
Yes.
definitely like a Brené Brown
Adjacent.
adjacent. Yes, when you
Yes.
said that, I'm like, oh, totally, totally. And I love that. Like, we can do hard things with Mars square Saturn. It's a great quote for it. And then I loved how you're sort of bringing in the wisdom of Saturn. Is like we can do hard things, but we don't have to. And I
Yeah.
think the Mars square Saturn, there's something about discernment or being intentional with Saturn coming in
Mm-hmm.
here. Like
Mm-hmm.
Mars is in Sagittarius, Saturn's in Pisces. These are planets both in signs ruled by Jupiter. Like they
Yeah.
do want to think that more is possible. But I think there's a wisdom of Saturn that kind of says, like, it's okay to say no, or that sounds amazing and it's not right for me just yet, or it's not right for me at this time. So there's something I always love, like sort of hard aspects to Saturn, because I think they're clues that we can say no, that saying no is sometimes like a tough but necessary choice that ultimately serves our long term kind of progress or building.
Yeah.
And so if you find yourself a bit stuck under this Mars Saturn aspect, December 8th or 9th, see how saying no might change something for you.
Yeah. And then a good
Yeah.
reminder that sometimes no is a full answer. And thinking about Saturn in Pisces ruled by that Jupiter in Cancer, like
Mhm.
you can always offer an alternative, right? Or you can always
Yes.
offer like
Yes.
no, but under these conditions, yes, or no, but maybe later.
Yes.
Like there's so many ways of saying no that can actually be relationally very helpful if you're interacting with other people, just to offer
Yes.
some perspective towards what is maybe possible at some other point.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that reminds me so much of therapy work, which is like, yeah, is there a way we could like clarify, request more information? Is there a preference that expressing is going to bring more understanding into the situation? So I love that point, Britt, that, relationally, this isn't like the end of the world for everyone's everything, but it might be a point that there's something really important that is worth going deeper and slowing down to kind of be
Yeah.
really present around. Yeah. Okay, so that's really the trickiest aspect for December, isn't it?
Yeah, I do feel
That's
that.
that's like
Yeah.
a classic traditional astrology,
Yeah.
more challenging signature.
Yeah.
So in some ways it's kind of nice to get it out of the way early-ish in the month, but it sounds like, for some countries like where you are in the Netherlands, it's like right at the end of your big holiday weekend. So that's
Yeah.
something just to be aware of.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's a good reminder that these aspects happen more commonly. They happen more often because Mars
Yeah.
moves quite fast. So it's also one that, can bring frustration, but we also often can easily move beyond that.
Yeah.
It does
Yeah,
not
and
last.
we're capable of handling frustration. We can
Hmm.
find new ways to channel our anger or to,
Yeah.
figure out different ways to assert ourselves that draws on our wisdom rather than, that sort of toddler approach of asserting themselves, which is like
Yeah.
having a temper tantrum. We can do better
Yeah.
than that as adults, basically.
Absolutely. I think we can all learn to be more comfortable with discomfort because that's
Yeah,
part of life. And this is one of
absolutely.
these transits that can bring up that discomfort. So it's good
Totally.
practice. It's good
It's good
practice.
practice. It's good practice for being a well-rounded human.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so I know there's a lot we could say. Let's just do a quick check and see if we have any questions or any comments we should address. If you are listening to us live, you are most welcome to drop any questions you have in the little chat bit. So, anything in the comment section we should look at, Britt? I think someone's asking a question about a beautiful thing you were saying.
Yeah, that's just a question around the what I said about relationships being measured by the quality of repair. Is that a
Mm.
quote from someone? I think it is.
Yes.
It's probably from my therapy training.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's probably I it's definitely from the attachment theory
Mm.
field, and I believe it's one of my teachers. Um, but it may not be a direct quote. So yeah, it could be
That's
from Kai
beautiful.
Cheng Tom. Yeah,
Yeah. I love it. I
just
love
to
it.
give a name.
It's a yeah, and that idea of, our relationships are kind of like modulated by the quality of our ability to repair
Mhm.
tension. I mean, I
Yeah.
think all of this discussion about how do we navigate differences is so relevant to a Mars square Saturn aspect, especially with Mars
Yeah.
and Sagittarius. Mars and Sagittarius can be a little, like this is what I believe, and that's everything. And Mars and Sagittarius can be quite really pressing its own point of view onto
Mm.
circumstances. And I think that raining, like one of the visuals I have for this particular Mars Saturn aspect is like Mars like a wild horse just wanting to run
Yeah.
free, and then
Yeah.
Saturn is like, the headpiece with the reins coming onto the horse.
Mm.
And that sort of relationship of like taming something that's a bit wild or a bit primal.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it does bring up like what we were talking about earlier, that towards the end of the month, and we are skipping
Mm,
over the new moon now, but we can address that also, that there's a lot happening between Sagittarius and Pisces, and I
yeah.
think that does speak to me to like the more individual nature that Sagittarius has, and in conversation with Pisces, being so aware of the whole and everything that is just all around, being ruled by a planet. Both of these places are, of course, ruled by Jupiter, who's
Mm,
currently in Cancer. So there's a lot to me that this dynamic or these squares between Sagittarius and Pisces, ruled by Jupiter and Cancer, speak to that tension between wanting to go at it alone, but then having to
mm.
remember, like, oh, there's a relational component here, there's care, and
Yes.
there's nourishment, and there's something about slowing down here too that
Mm,
it's really important to
yes.
remember. Yeah, that
Yes.
can be hard for Sag placements, I think.
Yeah, and I think this is a beautiful point that you've kind of done such a great job of sort of just encapsulating, which is that as all of the quicker moving planets like Mars, the Sun, Venus, and then Mercury, all of them are moving through the latter part of Sagittarius as December unfolds. And increasingly so once we get to like the middle and like the third and fourth week of December. And so they're all interacting with Saturn in Pisces. So there's this constant thread of like planets in Sagittarius squaring Saturn in Pisces. And there is this sort of series of almost realizations about maybe interconnectedness that I think is
Yes.
going to come forward for all of us. And I
Yeah.
love how you're linking that back to, the planets in Sag and Saturn in Pisces all go back to Jupiter in Cancer. And there's so much about care and belonging and safety and simplicity with Jupiter in Cancer that one of the words I keep coming up with for any time I'm reflecting on Jupiter in Cancer is this idea of what is sustainable.
Mm.
And I know we often think about sustainability in an environmental context, which is very relevant and appropriate with Jupiter and Cancer. That idea of like 7 generations forward from like a climate change or environmental point of view. But I also think there's something about sustainable choices in literally every part of our lives. Like, and sustainable not just in an externally sustainable way, like, helping the planet, but is it sustainable for me to be organizing social or family events that require this amount of energy or, money or time, do we always have to be these lavish big things, or is it more sustainable to look at something that focuses on the essence or the heart, which is gathering people to share a simple meal? And it could just be a pot of soup
Yeah.
and a loaf of bread and a welcoming door. It doesn't have to be like a 5-course feast.
Mm.
There's something about this Jupiter in Cancer, which I think is a good reminder that at our heart as humans, we long to be in connection and community with other humans. And we actually
Yeah.
don't need that to be fine china and fancy, couture. Literally a simple meal that somebody just took half an hour to whip up some veggies or some chicken. it's
Mm.
the it's the connection and the gathering, I think, that's more important than the presentation or the performing, if you like. And so that idea
Yeah.
of sustainable, every time we hit these Saturn squares, I keep coming back to, like, I'm not quite as sustainable as I could be yet. How can I simplify it so the heart of what matters really gets the focus?
Yeah.
There's some of my ideas about really like bringing it down to the basics, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. And it just reminds me of, like, for me, thinking about Jupiter and Cancer, there's also something about just being present with
Mm,
family or with what's here. That's enough. And
yes.
that, that's, thinking about the relationship or the aversion between Cancer and Sagittarius, right? Because these
Hmm.
two places have Jupiter in Cancer is responsible for Pisces, and there's a beautiful trine aspect there. But with Sagittarius, there's a bit of an aversion. So it's harder to meet like both needs of those places. Just thinking about with Sagittarius placements, there's a lot about wanting to cover more ground, more territory,
Mm,
like expanding, conquering in a way, in some way, new
yeah.
ground. That I think is a really helpful reminder from Jupiter and Cancer. Like, what about here? What about now? What about what's just around you in your
Yes.
family, in your home? How can you
Yes.
make that more abundant?
Mm.
It's a good reminder.
Yeah, and I think you're also getting to something that I was having trouble putting into words, which is like the abundance is in the connection. It's in that
Yes.
felt space. It's not
Mm.
in like the stuff, if you
Yeah.
like. Yeah. Do you have a little visitor?
I have
Speaking
a
of.
little visitor. Yeah, he's like, you're talking about family?
Yeah.
Come
Oh my God. So
in.
cute. Oh my gosh. What a cutie.
Yeah.
Oh my
I see
gosh.
there's a question coming
Yes, I think
in.
there's a couple of questions. So
Yeah.
let's do a couple before we wrap up.
So Jay is saying, I'm curious on your thoughts on the nature of my stellium itself. And I
Hmm.
think this is about a stellium in Capricorn and how that affects themes of the station that's happening with Jupiter opposing these placements. So yeah, at
Ah,
the end of Capricorn.
yes. Okay. Okay. Uh, I mean, and I think this Jay is also sharing that Venus is their time lord, like in the comment just above.
Oh yeah.
I mean, so I think Jupiter station, like, first of all, a Jupiter aspect, a square on opposition is still considered to be quite helpful from Jupiter. And so it's still like a Jupiter combination. And you've mentioned like Neptune and Venus and Uranus. And I think there's so many ways to unpack that, and we may not address them all now. In the context of your birth chart, I'd be thinking about the Venus things in the chart, Venus general things like relationships, self worth, leisure, enjoyment. And then the topics of Venus's houses, the topics of like Taurus and Libra houses, and how the influence of Neptune and the influence of Uranus would inform those experiences. And then I think timing wise, we can almost set the outer planets aside a little bit if we're doing some timing with the perfections. And Venus is quite well placed by sign in Capricorn, so that's lovely. And then for your Venus as a benefic, as a Time Lord, to receive a transit, any transit from Jupiter, to me, this feels like expansive, and it feels as though Jupiter in Cancer can bring a lot of moisture to Venus in Capricorn. And so Jupiter can be encouraging connection. It can be encouraging some of this togetherness. It might be drawing out expressions of emotion or vulnerability, which Venus in Capricorn on her own isn't normally prone to. So there's some of the little things that I would think about for that. What about you, Britt, with that Jupiter, Venus, and Venus as Time Lord?
Yeah. Just to add in that Jay is a Scorpio rising, so then Venus rules the seventh house, which Jay was
Ah,
saying a lot
even
of
more.
reflection and
Yes.
learning within my relationship this year for sure, which is beautiful. And then just to
Yeah.
add in that piece of Jupiter transiting the natal ninth at this
Yes.
moment, really bringing that larger perspective of like
Mm,
what do I really believe in and what do I care about, right?
yes.
What are my visions and my ideals and my beliefs? That's what Jupiter is doing right now. And to add that into the Venus in the third house, which is, much more focused on the immediate surroundings, which I think can be very helpful to have. It's just a beautiful transit. So enjoy it, Jay.
Yes, it's like and I think too with Jupiter by transit in this relational context, there can be a lot of learning or wisdom, like the growth around relationship comes through sometimes understanding the differences. Like it, as much as we love our partners, it's really good to understand the ways in which we're similar and we agree and we want the same things. And it's just as helpful to really respect and cultivate the ways in which you're different. And I think maybe that opposition aspect of Jupiter is a clue about it doesn't mean you have to start to like and love all the things your partner does that you normally don't, but at least to appreciate how important those things might be to your
Yeah,
partner. Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Uh, it looks like there might be one other question. Do you have time to do that one, Britt?
Yeah, let's do that one. So
Yeah.
Debbie is saying, I have transit Saturn in my first house, opposing Moon in my seventh. I feel so exhausted and alone. Can you advise how I can turn this into a positive?
Okay, this is a really tender question, and Saturn is in Pisces by transit, and the moon, I guess, is in Virgo in the seventh. I actually have a whole blog post on my website, and it might even have a video on YouTube that is very explicitly about transits from Saturn to the moon. And so I'm going to drop the link, but also feel free to check that out. We're going to say a little bit about that now, but just so you know that there's more resources. First of all, I want to acknowledge that people often really grapple with feelings of isolation and loneliness in a Saturn moon transit. It can feel as if there's a lot more, a lot extra that you have to manage or be responsible for. And we can often feel alone in these duties or obligations. So it's definitely a time where we're kind of exploring lots of things to do with care and vulnerability. Like, what is it like to care for myself? What is it like to engage with others in the hopes of receiving support or care at a time when you might especially need it? And so I wanted to just sort of acknowledge the aloneness is a very real kind of expression of a Saturn moon transit. And then the exhaustion, the moon is a planet to do with our physical body, our well being, in our kind of visceral, tangible self. And Saturn moon transits can sometimes point us to extra steps that we need to know about how to care for our body. So, at a very simple level, a moon in Virgo, I always would ask a client about food and digestion as a thing that might need a little more attention in a Saturn moon transit. The moon in Virgo is kind of best nourished by a really clean and simple uh, eating strategy. So, like whole foods, high quality fruits and veggies and meats, whatever your eating protocol is, you just want to make it the best quality that you can. And Saturn moon tends to be a drying type of thing, and so bringing moisture into the body, which can be hydration with like literal water. It can be more fruits and vegetables. It can be certain supplements that really help and support digestion. It can be making sure you're getting enough good fats in your diet. And it can also be minimizing things that have a drying effect, which sometimes are the fun things people enjoy, like coffee or sugar or sometimes alcohol. All of those things tend to be quite drying and depleting, which you might be more sensitive to in a Saturn transit to your moon in Virgo. And so, in terms, Debbie, of how to turn this into a positive, I think exploring these ideas about vulnerability, who is it safe for me to be vulnerable with? How can I like improve my self-care, physical strategies? There's some of the things I would think about. And Saturn moon can sometimes highlight where we aren't able to manage things that we have managed in the past. And the way that we work that through is we either delegate tasks, like if you're in a relationship, running a home and working, it might be we need to have some help at home or we need to have help at home more frequently. Um, so there's things like that. And then so delegating, or sometimes it's about saying, I'm just not going to be as available to others in this time because I really am prioritizing myself. So there's some of the things I think about. I could probably talk about Saturn moon transits for about 3 days, but hopefully that's given some good stuff. Britt, what do you think about for Debbie's situation? Is there anything you'd
Mm.
add or anything that you might do in addition or differently?
Yeah, I was also thinking along the lines of moisture. And I think in a
Yep.
diet, that's a good one. But also thinking about things, because I do agree, like physical self-care and soul care is very important
Mm,
under a transit like this. So beyond the diet or just being around water, just thinking about the things that help you
mm,
get the juices flowing a little bit. So what kind of moves, what makes you just feel more alive and abundant within that, just to
mm,
give yourself a bit of that nourishment. And yeah, I think especially for someone with the moon in the seventh house, I think it can be a very good reminder to give to yourself first,
mm,
as opposed to giving to other people. And it's such a good reminder to let yourself not be as available for other people because you
mm,
don't always have to be. And I can imagine the moon in the seventh person feels that that's like something that's something you have to do. So just prioritizing yourself and giving yourself that care that you need, and just to remind yourself that this is if this is a transit that you're going through right now, then you've gone through this transit before and you're at the tail end of it. So you're moving out of it. There's hope, and
yes.
both Saturn and Neptune will move out of your first house relatively
Yes.
soon. So just know that this is part of a cycle that you're moving through, and there's light at the end of the tunnel.
That's such a good point, Britt, isn't it? Because sometimes in astrology, you know, sometimes it's possible to work with the transit, but sometimes, like, to sort of make it a happier experience, it's tricky to make a Saturn moon transit a super happy thing, even though there's probably some productive or constructive choices that you can make. And I think I was thinking that too. Like, I'm like, this is almost over. So sometimes the timeline is, okay, this real contraction or that feeling of being alone, you're almost at the end of it. And I was thinking, if Saturn is opposing your moon now, so your moon is like 25, 26, 27 of Virgo, Jupiter will come to make a sextile towards the middle of 2026. So that's not only is Saturn and Neptune going to be away from your moon and out of your first house, then we'll have Jupiter bringing a little bit of expansiveness or a little bit of possibility or a little bit of that
Hmm.
like extending out. Um,
Yeah, and
yeah.
even the Uranus trine from 27
Yes. Yes.
Taurus could bring a lot of excitement again. And I don't know where your moon is. If it's 25, it will be, within a wider orb, but it could, towards like the beginning of the new year, there could be some more excitement and a bit of expansion, like things
Yes.
their energy starts coming back, which could be really helpful as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so beautiful. And I mean, we haven't explicitly said this, but I'm going to say it now as we're getting to the end of our time together today. We've talked about like Saturn transits ending, Neptune transits ending. I really am increasingly as I'm looking at the astrology of December and early January, it really feels like closing down of a
Mm.
longer cycle. Like
Yeah.
we are wrapping up what has been, for a decade or a little more. And there's something about the end of December 2025. It's the end of the month, it's the end of the year, but it feels like the end of an era or the end of, the last decade and a half. It feels like a bigger transition point than just being in, this random 2025 to 2026 shift. Like energetically, it's closing down and winding down. And so I think if there's a lot of just resting, that's going to work beautifully
Yeah.
because as we get further into 2026, it's all systems go. So a part of me is like, rest now while you can for
Yes, yes.
everybody, not just Debbie, but
Hibernate,
for, yes.
hibernate.
Yeah. If it's winter, like if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, really let yourself get quiet for this winter
Yeah.
because as we roll into the spring and summer, it is very quick. So
This
yeah.
reminds me this reminds me of a quote that I know you love quotes, Kelly.
I
So
do. I love
it's
my quotes.
it's from Gaston Bachelard from The Poetics of Space, and it's about a creature that hides in its shell is preparing for whirlwinds of being, and I think that's 2026 is whirlwinds of being. So hide in your
That's so
shell.
perfect. A creature that hides in its shell, preparing for whirlwinds of being.
Yeah, there's more to the quote, so I'm
But
paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it.
that's
Yeah.
the just, and so right now we're hiding in our shells because the whirlwinds are coming. Yes.
They are
That's,
coming.
couldn't think of a better note to finish on, Britt. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
let people know where they can find out more about you and your astrology services.
Yeah, so you can find me on somaticastrology.co, so .co. I offer astrology consultations. I offer coaching containers to really help ground astrology in a very embodied and felt way.
Mm.
I like to work with astrology in a real way and make it very practical. And I think that's also what Kelly does. So we're very aligned in that way, but bringing in the body as a real component to feel and experience astrology. So if that's something you're interested in, you can find me at somaticastrology.co.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Britt. It's always a treat to be able to sit down and talk through some of the astrology with you. And I know all our viewers love to hear everything that you have to share. So, what have I got going on? kellysastrology.com. Lots of classes and webinars. I am doing a holiday sale this last weekend in November. I've been living in North America for a while, so I've been totally influenced to run a Black Friday sale. But if you would like to save, there's 20% off online classes, webinars over at kellysastrology.com this weekend. The code to save is light20, and just enter that as you're checking out, and the discount will be applied. So I think that's it from us. We will be back to share more at some point in the next little while. We'll compare our schedules and see if Mercury supports us or not. But otherwise, we wish you all a wonderful head into December. Thanks again for joining me, Britt. I look
Thank
forward to
you.
doing this again soon.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.